I wasn't always the kind of woman who kept secrets. For most of my adult life, I was the type who folded laundry in neat piles, remembered birthdays without a calendar, and never forgot to pick up milk. I was a wife, maybe not the perfect one, but certainly a devoted one. I knew how my husband liked his eggs, over easy, not runny, which drawer he kept his shaving kit in, and how he preferred silence over confrontation. We were comfortable, familiar, predictable. But I think that's exactly where it all began, somewhere between the comfort and the numbness. Somewhere in that quiet, aching space where routine slowly begins to kill desire.
His name was David.
Technically, my stepbrother. Though I suppose the word feels heavier than the truth behind it. Our parents had married when we were already adults. We hadn't grown up under the same roof or squabbled over toys. I met him when I was 38 and he was 42, two fully formed people with careers, opinions, and enough life behind us to carry our own shadows. We were introduced at the wedding, a modest backyard affair in June, my mother radiant in her pale blue dress, his father drunk before the cake was cut. David shook my hand with a grip that lingered just a second too long, his thumb brushing the inside of my palm as if he already knew too much. I remember thinking he smelled like cedarwood and something warm, maybe leather. He was handsome, not in a magazine way, but in that weathered, real-life kind of way that came with sun lines around the eyes and veins on strong forearms. A man who knew his way around tools and didn't check his phone mid-conversation. I didn't think about him again for a long time. Not really. We saw each other now and then at family holidays, the rare barbecue, or that week my mother landed in the hospital with pneumonia. Always polite. Always just the right amount of cordial. He'd ask how things were with Mark, my husband, and I'd answer with the usual half-truths. Busy with work, still coaching the little league, we're good. That kind of thing. And we were good. At least, by most standards. But years have a way of reshaping even the firmest foundations. Mark and I stopped touching each other the way we used to. Conversations turned into logistical updates. Affection became habit. We still loved each other in the way people who've shared 2 decades do, but it was no longer the kind of love that made my breath hitch. The shift with David didn't come all at once. It was subtle, like water seeping through stone. It started with a phone call about a surprise party for my mother. He wanted to plan something intimate but thoughtful, and I offered to help. He came over one afternoon to go through old photo albums, something about choosing pictures for a slideshow. We opened a bottle of red. We laughed more than we should have. There was a moment, God, I can still feel it, when he was sitting beside me on the floor of my den, papers and photos scattered around us, and he reached for a picture at the same time I did. Our fingers touched. I looked up. He looked down. And for just a beat too long, neither of us moved. I should have pulled back. I should have stood up and excused myself, made some joke, reminded him, or myself, that we were family in name, if not in blood. But I didn't. Instead, I let the air thicken between us. I let my knees rest against his. I watched the way his eyes flicked down to my mouth when I spoke. I hadn't felt seen like that in years. Later that night, long after he left, I stood in the mirror brushing my hair and noticed the way my skin flushed when I replayed that moment. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just bored. That married women, especially those approaching 50, sometimes got strange ideas when someone looked at them like that. But the truth had already begun to unravel. The next time we saw each other, it was under the pretense of finalizing the video. He came by with a flash drive and a bottle of something stronger. Mark was out of town for a sales conference, one of those 3-night hotel affairs where he always returned with plastic pens and a stiff back. David didn't come in right away. He stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight like he was second-guessing the whole thing. "You can come in," I said, leaning against the doorframe. He looked at me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Are you sure?" I stepped aside. I wouldn't have opened the door if I wasn't. We didn't go straight to the den. Instead, we sat in the kitchen. He poured the whiskey, just 2 fingers, no ice, and we talked. Really talked. About how strange it is to feel invisible in your own life. About how marriages grow quiet in the corners. about loneliness that creeps in even when you're never really alone. I remember the silence that followed. Heavy, expectant. I shouldn't be here, he said finally. I know, I said. But I didn't ask him to leave. The first kiss was slow, deliberate, like opening a drawer you're not supposed to look inside. His lips brushed mine and pulled back, testing. When I leaned in again, it was the first time I'd kissed someone new in over 20 years. It felt like sin and salvation all at once. His hands found my waist. Mine slipped under the back of his shirt, against warm skin and the ridges of his spine. When he lifted me onto the kitchen counter, it wasn't rough or urgent. It was reverent, like he couldn't quite believe I was real. We didn't make love that night. We came close. Clothes half off, breaths mingled, pulses tangled, but I stopped us. Some trembling part of me still needed the illusion of control. Not yet, I whispered, my forehead pressed to his. Not yet. He nodded, didn't push. He stayed until 3 a.m., and when he finally left, he kissed my hand before he walked out the door. I couldn't sleep. Not from guilt, not yet, but from something else. A strange, electric ache that curled low in my belly and stayed there like a secret I wasn't ready to speak aloud. I told myself I wouldn't let it happen again. Elite. For the next few days, I felt like I was watching myself from the outside. I went through the motions, making coffee, folding towels, replying to emails, all while carrying something alive and restless beneath my ribs. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped like a girl half my age. And when it wasn't him, I felt that odd hollowness, like a wave pulling back before it crashes. David didn't text the next day, or the day after that. By the third day, I began to question everything. Had I misread him? Had I scared him off? Was it only the whiskey? But then on Thursday, sometime around 8 p.m., a single message popped up. Are you alone? I stared at the screen longer than I care to admit. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Breath caught. Yes. The typing dots appeared immediately. Can I see you? There was no emoji. No plafelton. Just 5 words, simple, honest, and impossibly heavy. Mark was in the garage, rearranging his fishing gear. He wouldn't notice if I took a walk. I told him I needed air, slipped on a coat, and left before I could talk myself out of it. David was waiting at the end of our street, parked under a dying oak tree. I climbed into the passenger seat without a word, and he drove. No destination, no small talk. Just the quiet hum of tires on asphalt and a tension so thick I could taste it. We ended up at a small overlook on the edge of town, where the city lights flickered like distant stars. It was a spot teenagers used for clumsy groping and stolen sips of beer, but that night it felt like something else entirely, like a line we couldn't uncross. He turned the engine off but didn't reach for me. His fingers stayed clenched on the steering wheel. I've been thinking about you, he said finally, his voice low, rough. I looked out the window, too scared to meet his eyes. I've been trying not to. He laughed, just once, dry and joyless. How's that working out? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The kiss this time wasn't slow. It was hungry, desperate. Months, no, years, of restraint cracked open in the dark of that car. His hands gripped my hips, mine tangled in his hair, and for a moment I forgot who I was. I forgot about Mark. I forgot the mortgage and the grocery list and the slow, dull ache of middle age. I was just a woman who hadn't been touched like that in too long. Clothes didn't come off all the way. His belt unbuckled. My blouse undone. Skin against skin, hot and trembling. I gasped into his neck, trying not to make a sound, my nails digging into his back like anchors. It was messy, cramped, beautiful. Afterward, we didn't speak for several minutes. He leaned his head back against the seat, chest rising and falling, while I stared at the ceiling, still trying to believe what we'd done. It wasn't until we drove back that guilt began to prickle at the edge of my spine. I showered when I got home. Not because I felt dirty, but because I didn't want Mark to smell him on me. That was the part that truly shook me. Not the sex itself, not even the lies, but how easily I'd slipped into the role of someone who could carry a secret like that and still make dinner. That week, something changed. Not just between David and me, but inside me. My body remembered things I'd forgotten it was capable of. Every casual brush of Mark's hand felt foreign. Every kiss goodnight was an echo of something I no longer craved. David and I didn't stop. We were careful. So careful. Texts were sparse, often deleted. Meetings were spaced out just enough to keep suspicion at bay. But the heat between us only grew. Once, we met at a hotel an hour outside town, some budget place with aging carpet and chipped furniture. I wore a black dress I hadn't touched in years, the hem just above my knee, the neckline a bit too daring for someone who usually wore cardigans. He looked at me like he wanted to devour me. And he did. It wasn't always about the sex, though God, the sex was incredible. It was also the way he looked at me, like I was wanted, like I still mattered, like I was something other than a habit. He noticed things. The new earrings, the scar on my ankle, the way I stirred my coffee counterclockwise. And he listened, truly listened, when I spoke about things Mark hadn't asked about in years. But even pleasure has its price. One night, as I was driving home from yet another stolen afternoon, I passed a familiar restaurant. I saw a couple through the window, maybe late 60s, holding hands across the table. Not saying much, just existing together. And I felt this strange ache. Not for what I had or what I was doing, but for what I used to believe marriage could be. Was I sabotaging something that was simply going through a quiet phase? Or had I already been abandoned in all the ways that count and just finally found someone who made me feel alive again? I didn't know. I still don't. What I did know was that I couldn't stop. David became my addiction. We found corners of time like thieves, quick visits during lunch breaks, longer trysts when Mark traveled. Once, during a family gathering, he brushed past me in the hallway, fingers grazing mine for just a split second, and I felt it for hours. We spoke less about the affair itself and more about the before, about who we'd been. He told me about his failed marriage, his regrets, the son he rarely saw. I told him about the years Mark and I tried to have children and failed, about the hollow birthdays and the slow letting go of a dream. He listened without fixing me. I craved that. Sometimes, late at night, I would lie beside my husband, wide awake, wondering if he could feel the space widening between us, wondering if he noticed the quiet way I'd begun to vanish. And part of me wanted him to, not so he could be heard, but so he could see me again. So maybe I wouldn't have to keep running away just to feel visible. But Mark didn't ask. He never asked. So I kept running. There's something no one tells you about cheating, especially when you're older. It's not just about passion or sex or escaping the weight of a life built over decades. It's about the silence, the kind that follows you home, the kind that waits in the bathroom mirror while you remove your makeup and look yourself in the eye and try to remember who you are. But in between those silences, I found something I hadn't felt in years. And that terrified me even more. David and I began to take risks we shouldn't have. Meeting during errands, inventing casual reasons to be in the same place. Once, I lied and said I had a dental appointment just to spend the afternoon in his apartment, the tiny one-bedroom space he'd been renting since his divorce, filled with mismatched furniture and books stacked like towers. That day, he made me lunch, not just a sandwich. He actually cooked salmon with lemon and garlic, steamed asparagus, and roasted potatoes. He set the table, poured wine. Liaconde. I laughed when I saw it. Seriously? He grinned. You deserve it. And in that quiet moment, something twisted inside me. Not lust, not even affection, but something heavier, more dangerous. The feeling that maybe I belong there. That maybe this version of life, simple, flawed, spontaneous, was closer to the truth of me than the one I had at home. We didn't rush to the bedroom that afternoon. Instead, we lingered, talked, shared stories. He told me about how he once drove through Colorado alone after his marriage ended, just to see if he could still feel something. I told him about the time I cried in a dressing room because a salesgirl called me, "Ma'am," 3 times in 5 minutes, and I suddenly realized I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. We made love slowly that day. No urgency, no hiding. Just bare skin and open eyes and the feeling of being fully, unapologetically known. When I left, he walked me to the door and kissed my forehead. Do you ever think about stopping? I asked, hands still on the doorknob. Stopping us. His voice was quiet. I nodded. He looked at me for a long moment. Every day. So, why don't you? He stepped closer. His fingers brushed my wrist. Because I've never felt less alone than when I'm with you. I drove home in silence, that sentence echoing in the empty spaces of my chest. Of course, life never stays still. Not for anyone. Mark began to notice something. He didn't say it outright, but I could feel it. How his eyes lingered longer, how he started asking me small questions again. Did you already wear that blouse this week? Who were you texting just now? Why'd you get home so late? It wasn't suspicion, not exactly. More like the slow flicker of awareness. And I hated how easily I lied. Once, when I slipped into bed after another afternoon with David, Mark reached for me. It had been months since he'd initiated anything. Maybe longer. His touch was hesitant, almost apologetic, and I froze. Is this okay? He whispered. I swallowed hard. Yeah, just tired. He kissed my neck. I closed my eyes and tried to pretend. I tried to summon that old rhythm, the one we'd danced to for years. But I couldn't stop thinking about someone else's hands. Someone else's breath on my skin. Someone who knew how to make me feel undone. After a minute, he rolled over. Nonger. Just that familiar quiet. I lay there in the dark, tears sliding sideways across my temple, and I wondered when exactly I'd stopped being his wife. Thanksgiving came, and with it, a family gathering that forced David and me into the same room again. Publicly. My mother was glowing, thrilled to have her children under one roof. Mark sat beside me, carving turkey and making small talk with my stepfather. David was directly across the table. He didn't look at me, not once, but I felt him like heat on my skin. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the wine had worn off, he sent me a single message. You looked beautiful today. I hated every minute of it. I didn't respond. Not right away. But the next day, I told Mark I needed to visit a friend. Instead, I went to David's. When he opened the door, he didn't speak. He just pulled me in, pressed me against the wall, and kissed me like he hadn't touched another soul in years. We didn't even make it to the bedroom. Afterward, we lay tangled on the floor, the soft hum of the heater filling the space. I can't do this forever, I whispered. He didn't flinch. I know. I don't want to hurt him. Not really. I know. But I also don't want to stop. He finally looked at me, eyes tired. We're already bleeding. Pretending we're not is the only lie left. Winter came. Cold mornings, early nights. Christmas lights blinking in windows. Carols on every station. Mark bought me a silk scarf I didn't ask for. I smiled and thanked him and kissed his cheek. David gave me nothing. Not a gift. Not a card. Just a letter, left in the glove compartment of my car after one of our stolen afternoons. It wasn't long. Just a page. Handwritten. I know I'm not your future, but thank you for reminding me I still have a heart. If this ends, I won't regret a thing, except not meeting you sooner. I folded it neatly and hid it in the back of my closet, inside an old jewelry box I hadn't opened in years. Some nights, I would read it just to feel again. There were moments, brief, fragile ones, when I thought about leaving Mark. Not because I was in love with David, though maybe I was, but because I realized how much of my life I'd spent disappearing inside it. Inside the routine. Inside the marriage that had become more of a shared history than a living thing. But I didn't. I stayed. Because habit is heavy. Because guilt wraps around you like vines. Because when you're nearly 50 and you've spent your life building something, the idea of burning it down feels impossible. And yet, every time David touched me, I felt more alive than I ever had sitting at that dinner table, nodding along to Mark's stories about budget meetings or vacation plans we'd never take. David didn't ask me to leave. Not once. He knew the rules. He knew the cost. And maybe that was part of why it lasted as long as it did. We weren't chasing a future. We were just trying to stay warm in the life we had. But warmth doesn't last forever. And I knew, deep down, I'd eventually have to choose. Not between two men, but between who I had been and who I had become. The beginning of the end wasn't loud. It didn't come in the form of a confrontation or a discovery. No screaming. No broken plates. It came as most endings do, in silence. It had been 3 weeks since I'd seen David. Life, our real lives, had gotten in the way. Mark's cousin had died suddenly. There was a funeral in Chicago. A house full of people. I played the role well. The grieving wife's comfort, the practical planner, the hand on Mark's shoulder when his voice cracked at the service. But I felt nothing. Not numbness. Not indifference. Just distance. Like I was watching someone else's life unfold from behind a glass wall. David didn't text. Neither did I. And yet, every night, when I lay in that stiff hotel bed beside a man I no longer really knew, I found myself silently whispering his name, not out loud, just in my head, as if saying it would somehow keep him close, keep the thread from snapping. When we got home, the house smelled stale, like closed windows and winter. I unpacked, did laundry, refilled the fridge. Life, in its quiet persistence, kept moving. Then one night, as I was wiping down the counters after dinner, Mark spoke. "Can I ask you something?" I turned. He was sitting at the table, still nursing the glass of red wine he hadn't touched all evening. Of course. He didn't look at me. "Are you happy?" The question came so softly, I almost missed it. I blinked. "What?" He finally raised his eyes. "Are you happy with me? With this?" My first instinct was to lie. Smile. Say of course. Change the subject. But something in his expression stopped me. Something tired. Something knowing. So, I told the truth. "I don't know." He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer all along. I figured. The room filled with something I couldn't name. Not quite sadness. Not quite relief. Just space. "I'm not angry," he said after a long silence. I think I knew something was wrong. Maybe I didn't want to look too closely. I swallowed. "Mark, you don't need to explain. And I'm not asking questions I don't want the answers to." That stunned me. There it was, Grace, in a place I hadn't expected it. He stood, carried his glass to the sink, and paused. "I want you to be happy, even if it's not with me." He left the kitchen. I didn't follow. I met David one last time. Not in a hotel. Not in his apartment. Just a quiet coffee shop off the main street, tucked between a florist and a used bookstore. He looked older that day. Not tired, just real. Less like a fantasy, more like a man who had loved someone knowing it wouldn't last. We didn't touch. "I think it's time," I said, stirring my drink though I wasn't thirsty. He didn't ask what I meant. He knew. I expected sadness. Maybe even anger. But he just nodded. "I know," he said. "I've known for a while." Tears stung behind my eyes, but I held them back. "I don't regret any of it," I said. "Neither do I." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. Just once, brief and warm. Then he stood. "I'm glad I met you," he said. And then he left. Just like that. No drama. No premises. Just the closing of a door we both knew had to shut. The weeks that followed were strange. I didn't confess to Mark. He never asked and I never volunteered. We existed in a kind of truce. Two people who had loved once, maybe still did in a way, but who were learning to see each other all over again. We started doing small things differently. Watching a show together in the evenings. Sitting down for breakfast on weekends. It wasn't a full rekindling, but it was something. He'd look at me sometimes, across a room or from the driver's seat, and I'd feel that flicker of the man I once knew, the one I'd married, the one I'd shared a life with. Maybe we weren't finished yet. Or maybe we were just choosing not to give up. I still thought of David. Not constantly, not painfully. Just now and then. A song on the radio. The scent of leather. A flash of memory. His hand on my knee. The way he once whispered my name in the dark. And when I did, I didn't feel guilt. I felt gratitude. He hadn't saved me. He hadn't rescued me from a failing marriage or turned my life upside down. But he had reminded me that I was still a woman. Still me. Not just a wife. Not just someone's second half. He reminded me that I could still feel. That I could still want. That I hadn't vanished after 40. Or 50. And that mattered. Sometimes I walk past that coffee shop. I glance in. Wonder if he ever comes back. If he still thinks about me. But I don't go in. I let that chapter stay closed. Not erased, not buried, just complete. Mark and I are still together. We're not perfect, but we're trying in ways we hadn't tried in years. He touches me more now. Not always sexually, but with intention, with awareness. And sometimes when we make love, it's slow and familiar, but real. I don't compare them. That would be cruel. They were two different parts of me, and both were real. I'm not proud of what I did, but I'm not ashamed either. Some things in life just are messy, flawed, beautiful in their imperfection. And if I've learned anything, it's this. Love doesn't always come in the shape you expect. And sometimes, the most honest thing you can do is admit you're lost before you find your way back.